Welcome to episode number 2 of System Prompt. Thanks for staying with us this long, and I hope you guys are able to enjoy another episode. My name is Val, digital marketer, AI native builder.
And my name is Peter. I am a self-titled AI solutions architect.
And today we're going to hit you with a different topic. We're going to be talking about local versus frontier LLM models. Peter, I know you got a lot of thoughts about this, so I'm going to let you kick this one off, man. What are your thoughts? First of all, before we jump in, let's let the audience know what's the difference between a local model and a frontier model.
Well, for the most part, a lot of times where you have, let's frame it as open source, right? Because just because it's a local model doesn't necessarily mean, it's any different than a local model. All the open source models can also be local models, but not everyone is going to be using them locally. They can be using them through OpenRouter. They can be using them through Grok. That's GROQ, not K, right? It's important. It's an important distinction to make. And you could, okay, so a frontier model is something that's hosted by, say, OpenAI, ChatGPT, Claude with Anthropic, Grok through XAI. And one of the biggest differences that you see are going to be the amount of parameters in their models, right? There's these big giant models that they're hosting in data centers. But is that really ultimately the difference between them, right? Or is it that OpenAI, Anthropic, XAI create this curated pipeline that deals with everything for you, right? They're not just handing you a pre-trained model and saying go. They're curating this experience for you. And we don't know what's under the hood, right? But we can assess based on some of these different tools that they give us. And say if you've ever used something like Claude Code, you realize, wait a second, sometimes it'll spawn haiku, sometimes it'll use thinking, sometimes it'll use sonnet, and you're like, but and now you're at a stage where it's just high, medium, or low effort, right? You're not even really selecting model type. What does that mean? Does that mean that there's a router somewhere there that's directing it to the appropriate model? I mean, you look at ChatGPT now, that doesn't even really let you select a model, period, right? You just have thinking or regular. Is mini routing under the hood before it even hit any of these? Now, that's what I mean when I say a curated experience, right? It's already, these orchestrations are already set up for you. Logic is already set up. Retries are already set up. Web search isn't something that you need to curate from scratch. I like to think about it in terms of this, right? You have a contractor, right? Let's say you need to build a kitchen. You hire a contractor. The contractor hires an electrician, hires a plumber, and orchestrates that whole thing for you. You don't have to deal with any of it. When you're dealing with open source models, and for the most part, you are the contractor. You're the one who has to deal with all the plumbing. You have to deal with all the wiring. Yeah.
So that means you also need to know what's a good plumber, what's a good HVAC person. You need to see if they're bonded just in case they make a mistake and burn down your house. Like there's a lot more to just picking a good electrician is what you're saying.
Absolutely. And especially framing it this way, right? Because you have like something like Kimi K2, right? Huge model, fantastic model. People love it. People love using Kimi K2. Are a lot of people self-hosting Kimi K2? It's a trillion parameter model. The answer to that question probably is no. There's not a ton of people that are doing that. But if you use Moonshot's orchestration and pipeline to use Kimi K2, you're getting that curated Kimi K2 experience. It's going to be different than if you're self-hosting it, because you have to build all those pipelines. When you use OpenAI and you just do a simple search this for the web for me, right? It's a lot different than when you're doing it set up. Models out of the box, when you download it off of Olama, it's not prepared to do any of that. It can't search the web for you. It can't discern how many retries it's going to do. It's going to take before it drops. But OpenAI, Anthropic, Grok, even these open source models with these people that are have curated experiences behind them have all of this there, right? They have all of that already preset up for you. So you get started, right? You're like, all right, I'm going to get started with an open source model. I'm going to download something off Olama, right? Because it's the lowest hanging fruit. We'll deal with Olama. Now you've downloaded a Quen 3.5 9 billion parameter model, right? And you're like, oh, this is really cool. What can it do? Well, you can chat with it in a CLI, right? That's the base.
You're making a case for why they're charging these API fees now.
I mean,
you're making a case for. I know you're not trying to make a case for it, but you're making a case for it because I'm thinking about it. And I'm saying, man, to go and have to do all that means you got to be an architect. You got to know how these things work together, and then patient enough to test it, and then have the technical know-how to actually implement that. Am I catching you right or wrong?
Look, you can look. The really cool thing with local models is that they're really good at very specific tasks, right? But then when you add in orchestration, you add in tool use, you add in retries, you add in routing, you add in memory, you add in constraints, you add in safety, you add in prompt tuning, and you're adding all these things to it, and you're just like, I'm just not getting the same thing that I would get from, say, like a ChatGPT, right? And even we looked at Quen 3.5 9 billion parameter together, right? And we wrote hello, right? We wrote hello, and what do we get? It thought for like an entire paragraph for 5 seconds on how it was going to respond to hello.
It's pretty impressive, by the way.
It was great, but it was inefficient, right? It's inefficient token wise. It shouldn't have to think for 5 seconds about how it's going to reply to hello, because it's just a greeting. So how does when you're talking to ChatGPT, it doesn't take 5 seconds for it to respond to hello. It was like, hey, how's it going? What can I help you with today? That's routing under the hood, right? So when it should be thinking and when it shouldn't be thinking. And that's just the low-hanging fruit there. When you're using a Quen 3.5 9 billion parameter model, you have to discern and decide, how am I going to make sure this isn't taking this long to respond to it, right? How do I make sure of that? Do I flag no thinking on greeting requests? How do I discern when is the program going to decide when it's a greeting request and when it isn't? These are all engineering choices that you have to make, right? And those are that is why you're paying those API costs. Now, look,
hey man, I'm just saying, it sounds like you're making a strong argument for why those API costs are there. I mean, I've never thought about it the way you're saying it, but it makes sense because you can tell clearly the experience. But the first thing that pops into my mind is like, okay, everybody's talking about local models. This is the thing. I'm a strong proponent of local models. I think there's a future where a large part of processing for AI is going to be done locally, not only for security reasons, but I think it's going to be it's just going to make sense from a processing standpoint, latency standpoint, and then there's just going to be a lot of tasks that you probably don't need a 9 trillion parameter model for. But the question is, like, what are those tasks? 'Cause everybody's saying that, local this, local that. Like, how does that game look like if you're somebody that wants to play the local model game? What are the limitations? What do you use them for? How do you envision a future where you would want to make that trade-off between local and frontier?
A lot of the times you're using these frontier models for heavy reasoning, right? You're using it for heavy reasoning. But even then, now you're getting these 30 billion parameter models that can do some really good reasoning. Like, I love using the Nematron 30 billion parameter model for an assortment of things. I'm really big on the 5.4 model that Microsoft has put out. That it's really an amazing model. Just to give you an idea of the things that you can do with some of these local models, is I have a whole research and outreach program set up, right? So what it'll basically do is it leverages Playwright. I type in search for such and such businesses within this area, it'll automatically go out, find all these businesses, validate these businesses, set up outreach for these businesses, right? And this is all the 5-4 model, but you have to have an understanding that a lot of this is deterministic pipeline under the hood, right? So a lot of people see it as, oh my God, AI is doing this. It is, but it's also deterministic pipeline under the hood that's doing it. And, we'll never know for sure how OpenAI is or how Anthropic's is set up. But I couldn't imagine that it's set up much differently, because it needs to understand when it's not doing something correctly to retry it, right? And I mean, we've all used them. It's not like these bigger models are infallible, right?
It's actually surprising how often we are okay with those models being wrong and just shrugging it off as, this is when you know a product is good or when something is disruptive. Because we know it gives wrong answers all the time. It's almost like the weatherman. Like we kind of accept when the weather's just completely wrong. What are the other options? But you make a strong point, because there is a tolerance level for these models giving out bad answers. But what does that look like for a local model? Is it still the same percentage of bad answers, but you just need to plan better, or you need to assign it the proper task to have it shine its best?
You really need to have a pipeline that can discern what it did right and what it did wrong. You need to have checks, a lot of checks and balances throughout, just to confirm what it did. And then if it can't confirm what it did, then you need to just have a loop in there so it loops back, does the action again, right? Now, I'll give you an example. With a frontier model, you'll have search, evaluate, act, and adapt, right? So it'll go out, it'll search, it'll evaluate, it'll act based on the action, and it'll adapt to it. With an open source model, if you've used open source models for any amount of time, you realize a couple of things, right? If you've asked it to do a tool calls, you'll, especially earlier on when you're just getting the hang of using it, you'll end up in a situation where it's search, it'll skip the search entirely, hallucinate the entire answer, and then tell you it's done. And then you're just like, what is the what am I looking at? And then if you don't understand that you have to fix the orchestration, because the orchestration is where the problem is, you're going to automatically deviate to, this model is no good, right? And you have a ton of people doing that. Like, look at OpenClaw, for instance, right? Look at a lot of people are under the impression that OpenClaw is local AI, and it sells itself off as local AI. It's not local AI; it's a wrapper, right? You look at it; it's a wrapper. Can you use open source?
Not like Jay-Z rapper.
No, yeah, right.
not Jigga Man. Talk about it's disguising itself as something that it's not in a bad way, but.
Yeah, well, it says it's this local AI that can be used for, your data is not going in. Your data is going somewhere, because chances are you're using an API for it. It makes the suggestion in the repo itself that Claude is the best model to use for it. So, okay, but anyway, if you've made attempts to use local models with it, you'll see exactly where local models break versus where frontier models shine. And the difference isn't so much so the model as much as it is the orchestration in the pipeline that's actually propping up these models, right? It's the scaffolding that's propping up these models. It's the abilities for these models to sit there, reason through something. When you think of things like chain of thought, we go back to the Quen model, right? Imagine the Quen model knowing when to use thinking and when not to use thinking. All of a sudden, your greeting gets that much faster. Right? Or when you're using something like a React pattern. Now, React, is this pattern where it's reasoning, acting, finishing, pushing out the end product, right? So it'll go through this, and this is when you use specifically for tool use: reason, acting, polishing, pushing it out, right? And that's all it does. But if you don't have a good pipeline set up for tool calls, it's open source models will generally collapse under it. Now, the other big problem is that depending on what runtime you're using, depends on how you're going to set up your tool calling, what model you're using depends. You see malformed tool calls, hallucinated tool calls. You'll see all these things with open source models. One of the things that I had architected to kind of set it up in a different fashion is these frontier models can look at 40 tools and discern which tool to use most of the time, because you're still going to see some failures there. So what I decided to do was I set up a router, and I created these isolated specialists, right, which use all the specialists use the same model, but it's a different system prompt for each one to give it a different kind of unique personality, so to say, or job type. So basically, and each of those specialists have a set of tools. Instead of exposing all 40 tools to any individual specialist, only the tools that it needs to do its job are the ones that are exposed. So now it's only reasoning across 4 to 5 tools as opposed to 40, and I'm getting much better success rates as opposed to trying to expose these especially these smaller models to 40 or 50 tools that you see break consistently when you're making an attempt to use OpenClaw. I know that the discussion is based on frontier versus open source, but it's really it really has a lot to do with a curated experience versus a raw pre-trained model, right? Because a raw pre-trained model is never going to live up to the same thing as a frontier model that has all this architecture around it. Right? Remember, we went over. It has orchestration. It's got fine-tuned tool use. It's got these It has these retries under the hood. It's got routing. It's got memory. It's got constraints. It's got safety, and it's got system prompting underneath the hood. And these things are built by entire companies of people that are continuing to work on this. And it's when you're taking a local model or an open source model and locally hosting it, or using it on OpenRouter, or using it on Grok, you're basically just getting the raw pre-trained model. You're not getting that whole pipeline, right? You're not getting the curation. You're not getting what feels like to be this well curated model that's doing everything that I need it to do. That has very good memory, has good has good session state awareness. Can source through your previous conversations and remember different things about you. When you're using a local model or an open source model, you have to build that. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, and it's a trade-off, right? Frontier models are easy and flexible. You have the open source models. They're gonna thrive at control, privacy, and ownership, which are huge, especially if you're in an industry that requires or are under any sort of compliance or any sort of compliance needs. And you can't exfiltrate your data, or you can't. The data can't leave your on-prem at all. It's got to stay on-prem. So local models are where you're going to thrive. And there's also other things that you could do with frontier models, setting up a gateway, have a PII scrubber. There's multiple things you could do, but even with the Kimi K2 example, if you're using Kimi K2 through Moonshot, it's a much different experience than you're using Kimi K2 locally hosted or just using like an OpenRouter API, right?
So I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, I have two scenarios that are jumping in my head now. I'm the business guy and I'm the guy at home. Let's start with the guy at home. And I'm saying, hey, how can I use AI? I don't want these companies getting all my data, but it sounds like there are limitations to what you can do locally. But it also seems like there's a bunch of stuff you actually can do. So let's say if I wanted to wire up my house so I can be like Tony Stark working with Friday, and I just talk to my agent and I have the lights turned on, the music down low, I get the pot, the air fryer going, or I can control the garage door. I can control the music if you have some sort of surround sound. Would you still have to go and have some sort of architecture like a Lang graph, Lang chain, Lang Smith set up? Or is there an easy route to set that up so that when I'm giving all of this permission to my home, I know that I'm only giving it to my local server. I'm only giving it to my local computer because that's where my model is being run. Well, not computer, but you know what I mean. Um, uh, is it the same heavy lifting to just get something like that? Are open source models fully capable of executing somebody's lifestyle like that?
So open source, absolutely, open source models are can absolutely do that for you, right? Um, but you have to create guardrails, right? You're not getting those guardrails out of the box. So a lot of the times people don't like their models executing. You know, we've both used agentic coding agents. We use them. We use them plenty. And you know how it prompts you before it changes anything. Are you sure you want to make these changes? That's kind of like what you have to do with almost everything. Now, I know that a lot of people are trying to get around that right now and just letting their agentic coding models just kind of go crazy and build things on their own, especially with NVIDIA CEO stating that if you're not using half of the amount that you're getting paid, you saw that? If you're a
Yeah,
500,000 a year engineer, you should be using $250,000 in tokens a year. I mean, of course he's going to say that. He sells the inference. He sells the
yeah.
compute. So yeah, he wants you using it. He so of course. But I mean, the real question is are you testing rigorously enough to know how this AI is going to act in edge cases, right? Because if you're just handing over the keys to the kingdom without doing rigorous testing, your stove might turn on in the middle of the night, your fridge might turn off, your garage door might go open, your Roombas might go and attack you in the middle of the night. I mean, who knows, right? I mean, you have to look. One of the things that AI really enables us to do is to run really fast, and we've never been able to run as really fast as we've been able to today. But sometimes you have to walk a little bit just so you can get to that endpoint to where you're comfortable actually using the product. So yes, you can get there with open source models. I know that I just kind of took a detour and went a long way about it. Yes, you can use open source models for that, but it's going to be at least a little bit of heavy lifting there. You have to create that orchestration pipeline, those guardrails. Those don't exist out of the gate. You're building those, right? You don't need to build them with a lane graph. You can do it with a deterministic pipeline, and you can make sure that your model can't touch the things you don't want it to touch, right? And only touch the things you do want it to touch.
Dun,
Yeah.
Can't touch this.
Yeah, I mean that's how it is, right? Though, but that's what it is, and that's what at least the near term future looks like. But if you're a business person and you're making a decision between frontier or local model, I mean, first and foremost, it's really a matter of what is your what's your posture? What's your security posture look like? What does it need to be, right? If you can't send data to a third party provider, then you don't have a choice. Open source is your choice, right? Uh, and there's a lot of very good and ways to work with local and open source models that you will get to where you need to be. You're looking at Minimax, GLM, Kimi K, Nematron models, 5.4, GPT OSS models. It's not a small ecosystem of models here that we're talking about. But you need to have an engineer in there who understands what they're doing in order to actually execute that, or you're going to get you can't just test a model once and see, oh, it works. Okay, I'm done now, right? You have to sit there and make sure. You're talking about these are probabilistic models, so you might get the same answer 50% of the time. Well, what do you do the other 50% of the time, right? What do you get in the other?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about it. I'm saying, okay, so it sounds like there is a viable option. If you're in the finance industry, insurance, banking, healthcare. It sounds like you don't have to let the AI wave pass you by, but you got to bring in the talent to help you build it. And I guess the question is, is the investment worth it? But it sounds like it is if your option is no AI, meaning like, if you fall in one of those categories where moving around data is sensitive, and you don't catch the AI wave, that's because you're choosing not to. Because there are options to help you on the security side, probably even on the cost side if you think about it in the long run. But what do you is that what you're saying? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, in the grand scheme of thing, the way that we're reframe this argument, it's you're comparing systems, not models, right? Curation is going to shape your execution. Convenience is outsourced complexity, right? The wrapper is the product, the system becomes the advantage. You use big systems to think, you use local open source systems to act, because you can control them to a better degree. You can really fine tune them for your use case. I mean, look at the guy that we were looking at. We were watching his YouTube,
Burke, yeah,
Daniel Bork, right?
Bork.
He does amazing things with local models, and you're
Shout out
talking
Daniel
time.
Bork.
The shout out, yeah, no, he's amazing stuff. I love watching his YouTube. He does some really cool things.
Please go check him out if you guys can. He's on it.
Yeah. Uh, and he put like a 500 million parameter model on a cell phone for a specific use case that was just scanning photos and trying to increase melanoma awareness in Australia. I mean, it's amazing what he's been able to do with these smaller models. But this is just an example of fine-tuned, focused, specific use case, right? Fine-tuned, focused, specific use case. These are things that are going to be general trends across these open source models. That they're good, especially the smaller ones, right? When you need something that's more generalized, a task that's more general, you need to actually do multi-step reasoning to kind of figure something out, and to get to an end, or some sort of decision, or some sort of answer for yourself. The frontier models are going to be a little bit better in that regard, only because of their pipeline and their orchestration, and how that scaffolding is developed allows them to kind of work within the reins better. They have a sandbox in the background that's running and executing code. They have really, really good, robust web searches because they're partnered with Google. It's not running a Tavily search or a Brave Search API. They're partnered with Google. They're getting really good information and data. They're able to discern between it very well. I mean, look. What we're really talking about is this, right? Do you want to go to the restaurant, sit down and have the meal, or are you going to go and buy the ingredients and cook it yourself?
Yeah.
Right?
Are you Blue Apron, or are you going out to the restaurant, or are you getting the entire the way you framed it? Can you frame that again? You said curation versus what's, because it sounds like we should be thinking about this a little differently. What was it that you said? Curation versus what?
It's curation versus pre-trained raw models, right? Because it's not just, again, this is really to drive the point home. We're not talking about a model versus model head to head, right? It's not just that anymore. It isn't. It hasn't been that for some time. It's OpenAI is creating this curated experience with ChatGPT for you to be able to just jump in and use it. Claude does the same thing. What don't you get when you're using an open source model is you're not getting that curation. You're just getting the raw model. So you have to have an understanding that needs to be built, right? That needs to get built from the ground up. And all that needs to get done by somebody who has an understanding of what they're doing. Look, can somebody jump in and figure it out? Absolutely. But what we're basically saying is that if you're a business and you're sitting there and you're thinking between, should I spend money on infrastructure, or should I just be outsourcing my inference to OpenAI or Claude? The question isn't. The question should be is business specific. First of all, compliance needs is the biggest question, and if you're not asking yourself that, then I'm not really sure what what you're doing.
If you're selling ice cream or something, maybe security for information on flavors is not the biggest thing compared to securities.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, unless you're taking credit card information and you're not going through something like Stripe, and then you're storing, and then you have to, you're under compliance, right? If you're using Stripe, it's sort of like compliance adjacent, right? Because they're handling most of your compliance needs for you. Um,
Just to be clear, ice cream people need AI too. So they're not there.
hey man, it could do all your graphics for you. You could if you're the ice cream guy, it can. You don't need to use those 1980 pictures of ice cream
Well,
anymore.
well, this is where I feel like we're coming home with this because there's a lot of people that are still on the fence, man. We're talking to a very small audience at the moment, but if you're in any of these fields and you're not thinking about how AI can help you out, then I think you're really missing the boat because the thing is that you're paying for it one way or another, and that's the thing that I think I'm hoping that whoever is listening to this could gather from it in terms of the options that you have with AI. The one thing you can't afford is to let the boat pass you by. Doesn't mean it needs to run your business. I don't think it should. But can it help you out with the things that you don't like? Well, yeah, it can. Well, and you also have options because if you don't want to be beholden to a large player, then you can go and invest in infrastructure to do that on your own. But I think the results are still going to be beneficial. The big issue is not even considering it, and that's going to be an issue because I don't think there's a business on planet Earth that can't benefit from having a very intelligent entity that you can play off of for whatever your needs may be, from writing, like you said, graphic design, video generation, data manipulation, data analytics, and from what you're saying, it sounds like these local models, that may be a local model for each thing we just said. One local model for image, one local model for data analytics, where it's not doing anything else. Don't ask it who won the NBA championship or the World Cup 50 years ago, but to have it process your data, it seems like there are really good options.
Absolutely, and I mean, just looking at like Notebook LM, right? If you look at Notebook LM, that's a very interesting use case and a very, I mean, shouts out to Google for it. Notebook LM is amazing.
Big fan, dude. I'm a big fan.
But that's orchestration. That's pipeline. That's a curated service in a nutshell that leverages AI, right? That's something. But I mean, it's more visible. It's more tangible that you can actually see what you're getting in terms of the orchestration, in terms of the curation of it all, and you actually see what you can actually do with it. But if we're going to drive one point to home here for this specific episode, is that the model is only part of the product.
Yeah. I mean, I'm itching to not go on this Notebook LM tangent, but you know what? I gotta go 30 seconds, brother. Yo, Notebook LM, I don't give Google a lot of credit sometimes because sometimes they do things I don't like and sometimes they do things I do. Notebook LM is in the do things I like category. It's probably one of the coolest products that really is it's cool because the point that you've been driving throughout this conversation is orchestration. They've nailed that orchestration with that platform. And they're pulling in a bunch of models. Well, a lot of their models can do many things at one time now. So they built it like that. But they really nailed it. And if there's a one way to like accelerate your learning on any topic, I highly recommend. Even on this, what we're talking about, or on anything AI, or anything in general. I use Notebook LM every single day, man. Every single day. But yeah, they nailed down orchestration. I'm also curious to see where they go with this product because I feel like we're just seeing the beginning. All right, so that was my 30 seconds.
Look, they deserve a shout out. It's a great tool, and it highlights the point of what we're trying to drive home today. Can you build? So a good question is, can you build something that rivals Notebook LM on open source models? And the answer to that is probably yes, you can. And the answer to, look at Comfy UI, right? Comfy UI is a whole image video generation. And what is it? What kind of tool is it? It's an orchestration tool.
Yeah.
So, another thing, right? The Claude Code, Open Code, can now accept these open source models. It accepts these orchestration. I mean, and when you use these open source models within those orchestration platforms, you actually get to see the changes and what the differences are between the models, right? But but these are much more tangible. You see you're seeing more of the orchestration. You're seeing more of how the pipeline is interacting with these models. You're seeing these sub-agents being drawn up. You actually can visually see that. But when you're just talking to like ChatGPT in the chat box, you're just talking to Claude in the chat box, you don't get to see what's happening as much under the hood. You don't know what's going on. You're not visually seeing the retries or what's going on under the hood. But know that there is something going on under the hood. Now, can I tell you what's going on under the hood? Outside of people that work at these specific companies, nobody can, right? And I'm sure that these are well-guarded secrets because that's the sauce, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what embedding model are they using inside of that model? Like, what are they using to break that information down and start that probability process? You know, like, what is the sauce? And yeah, they're hiring a bunch of scientists for a reason. You know, a bunch of data scientists, a bunch of mathematicians, because they're doing really interesting stuff. It's happening so fast, it's almost hard to keep up sometimes. But this in one way or another is not going to change. I'm curious though, like, I guess what do you think it would take for this process to be easier for the consumer? What would that look like? So let's say you don't have all the experience, or you don't want to go and learn all this technical stuff, but you want to use a local model. What do you think it'll take the industry to get to in order to make it easy for the average consumer to run a local model, or the average business to run a local model?
I mean, look, if you're the average consumer running a local model, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that you can go and you can. It's a lot of reading. It's a lot of having an understanding. It's a lot of going back and forth with your agentic agent. You and I do, local LLM lab on Fridays. We have a website set up for that. We can put that in we can put that in the comments, so people can go. They can sign up for it. They can see some some information, how to get started, where to find these models. But for businesses, for a single person, it's a lot easier because you're not dealing with things like concurrency, right? You're using it by yourself. Then when you're talking about a business, you're really talking about, what am I running these local models? What are they doing? What kind of concurrency? And that concurrency is going to dictate what models you can use based on what infrastructure you can afford, right? Because you can spin up, I have a DGX Spark. I can spin up a bunch of models on it, but if I'm going to have 10 people using the same model, I can't use the biggest model I can available, because your KV cache has to be able to absorb it. Your KV and the rate in which your KV cache can absorb it depends on how much VRAM or RAM you have available for it to store a lot of that data and a lot of that session information. I'm just trying to speak about it in a way that can people have at least an understanding, a high-level understanding of what's going on there. If you're not going out and buying an RTX 6000 with 96 gigabytes of VRAM and being able to run a big model for 150 people, right? You're probably going to need multiple models or multiple video cards to run it, depending on your level of concurrency that you need. And that's kind of the game, right? Especially in terms of businesses. But again, some businesses don't have the choice because there's some data that cannot leave the premise. So what about if you don't need something that has high concurrency? What if it's not a chat bot that people are having conversations with, right? What if it's a bot that just does a thing when you drop it into a folder? It'll do OCR. You can use a vision model. It can do summarization. It can auto send out emails. It can do reminder emails. It can do text to voice to text. It can do text to task. It can there's a lot of different pipelines, a lot of different orchestration that you can set up for it to do that isn't just chatbot related or high concurrency, right? It just does a thing when a trigger happens, and then you can just wait to see what the end result of that is. And that's not going to be as time intensive as needing to ask a question and get a response immediately. You can also, but from what I understand, a lot of businesses now are they're just talking about whether or not they're going to use Copilot. I mean, we talked about this at the first episode. Are they going to enable Copilot or Gemini for their staff? Or, they're not even talking about using like their ADK, which is the Agent Development Kit, or a software development kit for specific AI to do these internal tasks, to build these internal tools. And that's really when you get the nitty gritty of it, right? And you can do those with open source models the same way you can do with frontier models. You can. And, what's the difference? When you're using an open source model, you're going to pay for an engineer to do a lot of this up front. And then maybe it'll be somebody internally or an IT staff or somebody internally that can stay, maintain it, do the thing. Instead of paying for, say, like API costs going out. You're going to have a much bigger cost up front than you will. And your costs will kind of level out going down the stretch, as opposed to paying for whatever it is for API costs. I mean, some of these people that are spinning up OpenClaw instances, I saw somebody that had a $1,500 bill after a day of OpenClaw running, right?
And this is the thing that I think people are missing, that, if you're using this, these great open source tools like OpenClaw, or even any of these, and you're not running something local, yeah, you're getting you're getting the platform for free, but in order to use it, you still have to pay. So, this is something that we still have to consider if you're not going the local route. But even if you do go the local route, you got to pay for a DGX Spark. You got to pay for so one way or another you got to pay. But the question is, what's important to you at the moment? And if it's privacy, privacy is probably really the big one. And then I'll say cost as a second place. Then you got to consider that. But if those are not the primary issue, paying $20,000 for a MacBook, and then you have to really think these things through, because $20,000 in API fees could run a heavily functioning app for like a year, depending obviously on how many users. But if you're talking about a solo developer or somebody that built something locally, so then why choose that over one? These are questions that somebody will have to make. But if privacy is an issue and cost is not that big of a deal, it seems pretty clear what you need to do.
Absolutely, but let me just push back on what you said just a little bit. What you're referring to is local, so you have to have the infrastructure for it, right?
Yeah.
But if privacy is not an issue, right, and you're trying to decide between what models to use for your application, well, you can always use OpenRouter and Grok, which provides these open source models at a much lower rate as anything you can get from OpenAI, from Claude. And then we're talking about Kimi K2, GLM, Minimax. You're talking about some of the best models out there today, right? And these models rival the so-called frontier models in specific benchmarks. But just have an understanding that even if you're using those, you still have to. What doesn't get changed is having to build out that orchestration, those pipeline, those guardrails, the curation doesn't get punted, because the only way those get punted is if you're using Claude through Anthropic, if you're using ChatGPT, if you're using paid for Kimi K2 API costs through Moonshot, right? Because or if you're using DeepSeek through whichever company has DeepSeek, you have to have that understanding that most of the time that when you're using open source models, you're just getting these raw pre-trained models, right? And I just wanted to push back on that a little bit, just on what you said before, just so people have an understanding that they don't have to just necessarily pick local, right? Especially if, like you said, if there's no security concern with the application, then there's nothing stopping you from also using something like OpenRouter, and you don't have to spend $20,000 on infrastructure. I mean, I don't want to tell you what I spend on infrastructure, because sometimes I'm just like, that I wanted. But look, I have what's referred to as a dev to prod lab, right? I can dev everything locally, and I can push it to prod. I can push it to AWS, I can put it to GCP, I can push it to Azure, I can push it to whatever. I don't have any upfront costs in terms of API. Everything I can do from my lab. So I don't have any issues with that. But it is, again, driving this point home for one last time, right? Frontier model, you're going to get a curated system. Open, it's a raw model, and you're going to build the system. Right? So that's the difference. That is, in fact, the difference. Now, whether it's better or worse is really, it's neither here nor there. It's based on need. I mean, in most situations, I imagine you're going to see a lot of hybrid because they're not going to want to pay for, they're not going to want ChatGPT to process their documents. They can use a local model for that, but they're going to use ChatGPT thinking to think around tasks that they need to do more research or a little bit more depth on. That doesn't matter because they're using web search one way or the other, and it doesn't really matter if they see what they hear.
And some of these research platforms like auto research, they're pretty good, man. They're pretty good, and Perplexity has a really good search. And obviously they're using these frontier models, so we don't know completely what's going on, but yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And I don't know, man. I'm thinking, what are things going to look like in the future? You know, what are we going to buy a fridge with an AI model on it? Are we going to buy our televisions going to come with a local AI model for movie selection or TV show selection? You know, how deep is this thing going to go? Is our AC going to have a little model in it? Our thermostat? What's that going to look like? And the coolest thing is who's going to build that? You know, that's because to check all those boxes, they'll have to have it run local. They'll have to have the orchestration. They'll have to have the guardrails. And they'll have to make it light. They'll have to make it, they'll have to check all the boxes. It's a big ask, but there's a lot of great builders out there. I'm curious to see who's gonna crack that, man, and what is that gonna look like? What can they unlock when that model is local and doing one specific task?
Yeah, no, and I feel like we've seen a bunch of instances in which it's excelling, and every day I read studies. Checking out ArcSiv, whatever. And in a lot of situations, they are saying that local models, smaller models in general, are as competitive as these frontier models when you're doing it for a specific task. It's only really in generalized use cases that these frontier models are really kind of going above and beyond. And yeah, no, but we could probably drone on and keep going about this for another hour or so.
Yeah, we do part 1, part 2, part 3. But I think we got what we needed to get, because this is going to be the conversation that a lot of people will be having in the future, in the near future, and definitely in the next 2 to 3 years. And setting that foundation as to what your options are is something that a lot of people could look into now. And anybody that really wants to get their hands dirty, these are the options that we have on the table. And based on your needs, what are you going to do with it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I wanted to thank everybody out there who's tuned in for episode 2. Now, obviously, we weren't as funny this go around, right? Look, we try our best. We try our best to be funny, but this is something that's near and dear to my heart. So I tried my best to bring the information this time.
It is. It is very near and dear. I could co-sign that.
I hope you all have a good weekend, and we'll be back next week. So I just wanted to kind of also go over some of the things that we'll be going over in the future. This week was open source versus frontier. We're also going to be going over, are AI agents taking jobs? We're going to do some research. Next week is going to be a fun episode.
Next week.
We're going to be talking about AI coding agents. We're going to be talking about physical AI. I'm actually really excited about that.
I am super excited. We might start that right now.
Stop it. We can't run that long. We're also going to be talking about big O notation and scaling, because we needed to put you guys to sleep at least once. Um,
Well, some of the stuff you talked about today is DevOps,
yeah,
for local businesses. You were talking a lot of DevOps.
yeah. So that's going to be the upcoming schedule for some of our podcasts. And I just wanted to say, you guys have a great one. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Peace.